Scary telling.
I never used to be an angry person. In fact, I was always known as the one who kept calm in even the most stressful situations. But that all changed when my neighbor's dog started barking. It wasn't just any bark, it was the type of bark that was so loud and constant, it felt like it was piercing through my skull. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself that it was just a dog being a dog. But as the days and weeks went on, I found myself getting more and more agitated. I couldn't sleep at night, I couldn't concentrate during the day, and I could feel my blood pressure rising every time I heard that damn dog barking. So, I decided to take action. I went over to my neighbor's house and tried to talk to him about the barking dog. I told him how it was affecting my life and how I needed some relief. But he just shrugged me off, telling me that it was his property and his dog, and that he could do whatever he wanted. I was angry, but I tried to keep my cool. I explained to him that I wasn't asking him to get rid of his dog, just to find a way to keep him from barking so much. But he wouldn't listen. He just kept repeating the same thing over and over again, "It's my property and my dog." After that encounter, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I started looking up ways to quiet a barking dog, and that's why I stumbled upon something that made me feel sick to my stomach: poison. I never thought I would be the type of person to harm an innocent animal, but I was desperate. I couldn't take it anymore. So, one night when I knew my neighbor was out of town, I slipped some poison into the dog's food bowl. It wasn't a lot, just enough to make him sick and quiet for a while. The next day, I woke up to complete silence. I couldn't believe it. Had it worked? Had the dog finally stopped barking? I looked out my window and saw the neighbor's dog lying on the ground, barely moving. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by my relief. For the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep through the night. I was able to concentrate on my work during the day. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But that feeling of relief was short-lived. A few days later, I saw my neighbor outside, looking distressed. He came over to my house and knocked on my door, and when I opened it, he was holding his dog in his arms. I could tell by the look on his face that something was wrong. "What did you do to my dog?" he demanded, his eyes filled with anger and confusion. I froze. How did he know it was me? I tried to play dumb, but he wasn't having it. He told me that he had taken the dog to the vet and they found traces of poison in his system. He had contacted the authorities and they were launching an investigation. I felt like I was going to be sick. I never thought I would get caught. I thought I had been careful. But now, I was facing the consequences of my actions. And as the neighbor walked away, still holding his sick dog, I knew I was in deep trouble. The days that followed were filled with dread and anxiety. I knew that I had made a terrible mistake by poisoning my neighbor's dog, and now that he had discovered it, I feared that I would be facing serious consequences. I tried to go about my day-to-day life as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone knew what I had done. As the investigation into the dog's poisoning began, I found myself obsessively checking the news and social media, trying to see if there were any updates. I was afraid to leave my house, fearing that someone would confront me about what I had done. But as the days went on, I started to feel more and more guilty about what I had done. I knew that it was wrong to harm an innocent animal, and I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. I started to have nightmares about the dog, about how it must have suffered in its final moments. I decided that I needed to face my guilt head on. I went over to my neighbor's house and knocked on the door, hoping to apologize and make amends. But when he answered, he just looked at me with cold, angry eyes. "You think you can just poison my dog and get away with it?" he spat at me. "You're going to pay for what you've done." I tried to explain myself, to tell him that I was sorry and that I didn't mean to harm the dog. But he wouldn't listen. He just slammed the door in my face. As the investigation continued, I became more and more paranoid. I started to think that the police were watching me, that they knew what I had done and were just waiting to arrest me. I couldn't eat or sleep, and I felt like I was losing my mind. One day, I received a knock on my door. It was a police officer asking if I had any information about the dog's poisoning. My heart racing, I tried to play dumb, but I could feel my palms sweating and my voice shaking. As the officer left, I knew that I had to come clean. I couldn't live with the guilt of what I had done anymore. I went to the police station and confessed to poisoning the dog, telling them everything that had happened. The police officers were shocked, but they didn't arrest me. Instead, they gave me a stern warning and told me that if I ever did anything like that again, I would face serious consequences. As I left the police station, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had finally come clean and taken responsibility for my actions. But I knew that I still had to face my neighbor and try to make things right. I knew that facing my neighbor wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. I went back to his house, hoping that he would be willing to hear me out and maybe even forgive me. But when I knocked on the door, he didn't answer. I could hear his dog barking inside, and I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. I tried knocking again, but still no answer. As I turned to leave, I felt a hand grab me from behind. Before I knew it, I was being dragged into the house and down a flight of stairs. I struggled against my captor, but they were too strong. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw my neighbor standing there, a look of anger and disgust on his face. "You thought you could just poison my dog and get away with it, didn't you?" he spat at me. I tried to explain myself, to tell him that I was sorry and that I had confessed to the police. But he wasn't having it. "You're going to pay for what you've done," he said, his voice cold and menacing. He chained me up in the basement, leaving me there with nothing but my thoughts and the sound of his dog barking above me. I tried to escape, but the chains were too strong. I could feel the panic rising in my chest as I realized that I was trapped. Days turned into weeks, and I was still chained up in the basement. My neighbor would come down occasionally to taunt me, telling me how he was going to make me pay for what I had done. I tried to stay strong, to keep my spirits up, but it was getting harder and harder. I could feel my mind starting to unravel, and I was beginning to lose hope that I would ever get out. As I lay there, chained up in the darkness, I started to question everything. How had I become this person who could harm an innocent animal? Was I really that desperate for peace and quiet? And what would become of me now that I was locked up in my neighbor's basement? The days stretched on, and I started to lose track of time. I would drift in and out of consciousness, barely aware of my surroundings. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of escape, the hope that I would one day be able to break free and make things right. But as the days turned into months, that hope started to fade. I could feel my will to live slipping away, and I wondered if I would ever be able to escape from my neighbor's basement. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, I was left alone with nothing but my thoughts and the weight of my guilt. The guilt of what I had done to my neighbor's dog was eating me up inside, and I didn't know how to make things right. I tried to keep myself occupied, to distract myself from the constant feeling of despair. But no matter what I did, the guilt was always there, nagging at me. I started to have nightmares about the dog, about the way it had suffered and died. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating and shaking, unable to shake the images from my mind. As time went on, I started to think about the bigger picture. Was my neighbor right to lock me up in his basement? Did I deserve to be punished for what I had done? Was there any way that I could make amends for my actions? I knew that there was no easy answer. What I had done was wrong, and I would have to live with the consequences of my actions for the rest of my life. But that didn't stop me from trying to come up with a solution. I spent hours thinking about how I could make it up to my neighbor, about what I could do to make things right. But no matter what I came up with, it didn't seem like enough. The guilt was always there, a constant reminder of what I had done. As the days turned into months, I started to feel like a different person. The guilt had changed me, had made me question everything that I thought I knew about myself. I wondered if I was capable of doing something like this again, and I was afraid of what that meant for my future. But no matter how much I tried to push the guilt away, it always came back. I knew that I had to face it head on, that I couldn't keep running from the consequences of my actions. So I started to write, to put my thoughts and feelings down on paper. It was a way for me to confront my guilt, to try and come to terms with what I had done. As I wrote, I started to feel a sense of catharsis. I was finally confronting my guilt, and it was helping me to process everything that had happened. I knew that I could never take back what I had done, but I could learn from it and try to make sure that I never made the same mistake again. The guilt would never fully go away, but writing about it was helping me to live with it. It was a reminder that I was capable of change, that I could learn from my mistakes and become a better person. Months turned into years, and I was still locked up in my neighbor's basement. The guilt had changed me, had made me question everything that I thought I knew about myself. But as time went on, I knew that I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to escape, to confront my neighbor and make things right. I started to plot my escape, planning every detail in my head. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to break free and confront my neighbor. As the days passed, I started to work on loosening the chains that held me captive. It was slow going, but I made progress every day, chipping away at the chains little by little. Finally, the day came when I knew that I was ready to make my escape. I waited until my neighbor had left the house, and then I started to work on the chains. It took all my strength, but I was finally able to break free. I was elated, but also scared. I knew that I had to be careful, that my neighbor could come back at any moment. I made my way up the stairs, my heart racing. When I reached the top, I saw my neighbor's dog, still barking away in his crate. I felt a pang of guilt, but also a sense of determination. I needed to confront my neighbor, to make things right. I made my way to his house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I knocked on the door, he answered, a look of surprise and anger on his face. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking. He was hesitant at first, but eventually he let me in. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I told him everything. I told him about the guilt that had been eating me up inside, about how I had been trying to come to terms with what I had done. To my surprise, he listened. He didn't yell or scream or try to hurt me. Instead, he seemed to understand where I was coming from. He told me that he had been struggling with his own guilt, about how he had been too stubborn to listen to my concerns about his dog. As we talked, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was finally confronting my guilt, and it was helping me to move on. In the end, we reached a sort of truce. We agreed to put the past behind us and move forward, to try and make amends for what we had done. As I left his house, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had finally confronted my guilt, and it was helping me to move on. I knew that I would never forget what had happened, but I was finally able to see a way forward. As I walked down the street, I felt like a different person. I had learned from my mistakes, and I was determined to never make the same mistake again. The guilt would always be a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. I was finally free to live my life, to move forward.